Dr. Friedman, thank you so much for this interview. It is an honor.
Well, honor is mine.
Mr. Friedman, you just returned to a Romania that has just emerged from a deep 5 months political crisis, also with Russian interference in our election. How do you interpret, as a geopolitical expert, how do you interpret what happened?
Well, Romania was a satellite country, as we say in America, to Russia. Russia is much weaker now than it was when it was the Soviet Union. We look at Ukraine and how badly the Russians fought, and after 3 years they could not conquer Ukraine. So I see a deep concern in Romania about Russian power, but I sit far away in America and I look at them and I see them as much less than they were 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So they try to influence elections, pay no attention, but it's very important to understand that Russia is not the Soviet Union. It doesn't have the power, it doesn't have the capability. And the Ukraine war is very important because it demonstrated the limits of Russian power. The Soviet Union would in 3 months have taken Ukraine. The Russians barely touched it after 3 years. So we have to draw a distinction between our memories of Russia and the reality of Russia today. They try to be influential, they try to influence elections and so on, but they don't have the power. So when they were dominating Romania, or Hungary, where I was born, well, the tanks came in 2 days in '56 and took care of it. This is not the same Soviet Union. But I find it very interesting that in Romania, there's still that dread of Russian power, that fear of what they can do. Your interests are in Europe and the United States because your interests are economic. No economic relationship with Russia is viable for Ukraine, for Romania. Still, the memory, I think, hangs over you.
Yes.
That there's a great power there. The Americans have a different view of Russia, and the Russians have a different view of themselves. So who's right? Well, I'm American, so of course I'm right.
But in the same time, Dr. Friedman, President Trump promised he will secure a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. And he became frustrated with Vladimir Putin. He said about him that he's absolutely crazy and he's playing with fire. And after that, in response, Medvedev threatened with World War III.
Well, if they want a war with the United States, a nuclear war, then he really is crazy. But he's not. He knows what he did. He attacked Ukraine for 2 reasons. One, he was afraid of NATO. He wanted a buffer zone. He didn't want Ukraine in there. Secondly, he wanted to show himself to be a great power, that Russia should return to being the great power it once was. Well, what he showed is that the Russian army is not the Red Army. It's very different, much weaker. Trump felt that he would, well, he's a politician, so he lies a lot, of course. He said he'd end it today. But he didn't realize that Putin can't end the war, because if he ends the war this way, everybody knows he lost. He doesn't know how to win, and he faces a great danger, which is that if you put the United States, the American president, into a position of having said that you were going to negotiate with him, and then you don't negotiate, we have options, military options, economic options, all sorts. And so he's in a very difficult position. He can't admit that he failed. He can't admit that he has to make a deal. And so he maneuvers somehow. But the American position is maneuver all you want. We're here, you're there, and you've got the problem. But what Putin wants is to make it appear for confrontation with the United States. And it's such an unequal possibility. So you want to, I mean, World War III, we didn't have it when we were really enemies and equals. Now you want it? No.
So do you believe that the war will go on, and maybe President Trump will abandon his ambitions to reach a peace deal?
Well, it's made it very clear. He said, you're playing with fire.
Yes.
The Americans have already been involved in the war with sending intelligence, sending weapons, and so on. We haven't begun to really look at what the Americans could do. I don't think we'll send troops, but there are 100,000 troops sitting in NATO still, and they could come in. But we can provide all the weapons needed. The weapons we used, that we gave them, the intelligence was from satellites. We could see the Russian formations. And therefore we could pass this intelligence on to the Ukrainians, and the Ukrainians could target them with missiles. So the Russians are fighting this war as if it was World War II, with many, many men, charging many, many men. But now when you do a formation, a lot of people in one place, that's an invitation for a missile strike. So what can he do? Well, he has to evolve his strategy very radically. The interesting thing about him, he's not changing his strategy. He continues to try to move large numbers of men. And that's just not really possible at this point. You have to have different tactics, and he doesn't change them.